we are now beginning the Energy Committee meeting. It is March 30th. It's 1:34. Um, for now, I'm going to skip approving the minutes on the agendas just so we can get to Mark. And we'll, just so, if we end up ending early, we don't have to keep him while we review the minutes from the last meeting. Um, so why don't we just jump in about like what we're looking for? Pete and I had previously met with Mark to just sort of start conversations about green communities grant applications and like what might be a possibility. Specifically, we were looking at updates to the HVAC system in the town offices, but since reconvening this committee, we I believe we came to the consensus that it would be helpful to understand better what different decarbonization steps we could take. And a technical assistance grant may help us develop that type of plan. Um, so I guess it'd be great to talk today about like, what would make a strong application for the technical assistance grants. And I had a couple like specific questions about like weatherization and whatnot. Um, but how about we start there? Does that sound good to everyone?
Sure.
All right, great. Well, so in previous meetings, we talked about, or at least Paul and I have talked about, oh, actually, let me pause. Nat just joined us, so let me take a quick pause.
There he is. He's very still.
Hi, Nat.
Oh, now he's out in the forest. You got to
Oh,
unmute.
you're on mute.
Would you rather see my office?
There you go.
I'd
Hi,
rather
Nat.
be in the forest.
That's true. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Sorry to be late.
No, that's all right. We're joined with Mark today to discuss green communities, technical assistance grants, help the town understand some decarbonization plans and priorities. Um, and yeah, I think Mark last time we talked, and also with Paul, like there's sort of this pull between the elementary school and the town offices in terms of like buildings to prioritize in terms of
Mhm.
um, grant dollars and whatnot. But I think at this point, like the elementary school, it's our understanding that needs a replacement. At some point, we can look at installing solar potentially on that building, but it kind of needs to wait until a roof replacement happens. In the future, it probably needs a boiler replacement. So that's sort of in the background. At the town offices, we are right now solar panels are being installed on the roof, and so it'd be also great to just sort of update some of our other um, what's the word, other infrastructure to supplement the electric that we're transitioning to, and our HVAC is needs some work. It's old and it's been failing on us several times. But I guess could you walk us through the types of projects that the technical assistance program would like allow us to do, and then sort of like what makes a strong application? What are the things that we should consider as we go through that
Sure.
process?
Yeah, so well, I'll start with the strong application part. I think you could probably look at the evaluation part of the PON, and it talks about reducing fossil fuels, electrifying buildings, reducing overall energy use, and really maximizing that amount. So these are competitive grants. So you're competing against other other municipalities, regional school districts. Uh, I think that's it. There are wastewater districts too. Other types of districts can apply for this. So we're evaluating those based on which ones have the highest potential for maximizing the amount of fossil fuel reduction, electrification, energy reduction. Um, uh, so that's really what makes a strong application. The types of projects that it can fund, it can be, we see a lot of requests for HVAC projects, different types of audits. If you're thinking about an owner's agent for like an energy services contract, that's another thing that will fund through this. Uh, Retro commissioning. So if you've had a building that's been around for a while and you want to look at looking at redoing some of the building management system or energy management system within the building, or looking at just making the building better from that perspective, like with the HVAC mechanical systems. That's another project that we'll look at. Design of solar, as long as it's paired with battery, it kind of rounds out the type of projects that we'll fund through Meta.
Okay, great. Paul or Nat, do you have any questions or comments? I just want to make sure everyone
Mhm.
has a chance if
Well,
needed.
I'm thinking clearly that I don't know if I'm thinking clearly, but I think clearly we we want to get the most bang for the buck. So to do that, we sort of have to know what our potential for reductions are and do a cost benefit analysis of, how much is this going to cost? How much is it going to save? And I think that's relatively straightforward. Given that if we have the data to make that determination.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, you would have a lot of the data through Mass Energy Insight. So you've been tracking your energy use. The town's been tracking their municipal energy use since they became a green community. So if you want to say we want to electrify this building, um, and we want a plan to do that, then your data, your numbers that you'd be submitting to us would say, this is the amount of fossil fuel. Like let's take the town offices, for instance. This is the amount of fossil fuel that we use. So this would be how much we would be reducing
great,
as a result of that.
good.
Um, I think this is Nat Fortune now. I think my question is more about preliminaries. For example, we mentioned the school's going to need a roof, and maybe it should have a new roof before we consider putting solar on it. But depending on what kind of roof is put on, it might make it easier or harder or even impossible to put solar on it. So I'm wondering if your office has any guidance of how to be upgrade ready for the sort of projects that DOER provides, like types of roofs that facilitate adding solar to them, or types of changes to the HVAC that don't then, preempt qualifying. Oftentimes, because of the state of finances, things often wait till an emergency and the boiler fails in the school and they have to replace it immediately, and they won't give themselves the time to investigate at that point whether, say, a mini split system for individual schoolrooms would have been better or not, right? And so I guess things would be like, what are the things that would help facilitate a conversion in advance, right? That aren't necessarily the conversion. And also, what is a typical time scale, right? Could the school say, oh, we think, or the town say, we think that this system is going to limp along for maybe 4 years. When should we be considering applying? And can you give us help in identifying what good qualifying projects would be available, right? Like for example, you said it was solar, but it needs to have batteries. I don't know similarly for the types of HAVC conversions. So that's two questions, maybe even three rather than one, but I'll stop there. All right.
So you asked first about documents. We don't have any documents that I can think of that would say this is the type of roof that should be put on. I think
Mhm.
an engineer would be able to tell you if the roof would be able to support solar on that.
Mhm.
It's not just the solar, though. When you're looking at a new roof, you'd also want to be thinking about an added insulation layer, if
Right.
possible, um, just to maintain that building envelope. Um,
But
are
I'm
you?
thinking if I can follow up, for example,
Mhm.
it might be that the roof can be put in, but the warranty would be lost if there were additional roof penetrations. Or a
Yep.
roof could be set up that wouldn't require penetrations for solar to be added, right?
Yeah, a
That
ballasted roof.
requires more forethought than we usually see happening, right?
Yeah. So is it, are you definitely going forward with a new roof on
That
Are
the,
we?
that has not been decided yet. So I think the elementary school at this point is like a project that we should keep our eye on for like
Mhm.
further down the road because the school committee itself has not approved those types of improvements
Mhm.
yet. It's just something that we're aware of, and we've been like hearing through the grapevine. And it's my impression that it would be that we should prioritize decarbonization of the town offices
Mhm.
as solar is actively being installed now and with an HVAC system that needs sort of as we were talking about, it's not an emergency. The HVAC still functions, but needs lots of maintenance and repairs constantly. So um, unless others on the committee disagree, I think that in this grant application, we would focus on the town offices.
All right, so maybe I could reframe my second question. I don't I don't remember what kind of HVA system the town offices have now. Um, are there grants available for planning or scoping out what kind of qualifying systems would be useful, right, or possible? So that if we have a couple of years, that it's not at the point of failure that we are suddenly trying to find out, could we do mini splits or is mini splits a ridiculous idea, you know?
Mhm. Um, just to finish up on the roof real
Sure.
briefly for the school. If you are thinking about going through the MSBA, like the Accelerated Repair Program, I think the feasibility studies for the roof, I believe, also look at if they can be made solar ready too. So if you are
Okay.
Okay.
looking through going through MSBA, that's a possibility, but I would verify that with them. Um,
Oh.
in regards to the town offices, um, uh, we do have funding for developing, that's through Meta, comprehensive drawings, designs, even bid documents, because that is something to think about. Even once you get the engineering documents, well, we'd have to, turn this around and go out to bid for them. So we want to make it um, a little bit, the process a little bit easier for the community to then take those documents and then actually go get the project. Um, so um, the Meta grant will support that.
Mhm.
Like
Fantastic.
developing that plan. The Meta grant is between 15 and 25,000. We also ask that you work with your utility too, and there's because they might be able to fund some of the engineering costs for that as well. Um, if you have more straightforward projects, then you may be able to use the project expediter program through the utilities, and um, that's through 25A section 14, so chapter 25A section 14 procurement, where you can contract directly with your utility, and then they use a subcontractor to do the work. As there's a lot of caveats to it, it has to be under $300,000. Has to be for one project, not you can't bid split or anything like that. Um, and it's per calendar year. that can occur in for one building. So there's a lot of caveats to it, but if you have other questions on how to use that, I'd be more than happy to answer those. We have a guidance document too that I can send you. But you can contract directly with them, and they would send out a contractor to give you a quote on, like, say you wanted to, move towards all air source heat pumps on the town offices. They could then come in, evaluate the building for both weatherization and HVAC, provide you with a quote for that, and if it was agreeable and it met the requirements of our of the procurement requirements, then you can move forward with it, and you can use that quote to apply for a grant for green communities as well. And that's outside of Meta. You wouldn't need Meta for that. They would just do that.
Mhm.
Okay. And
So,
can you remind me, Mark, when the deadlines are for Meta versus also, is it technically like an implementation grant, the Alternative Green Communities grant?
So the Meta grants are due June, the first week in June. About like the next one's due June 5th in 2026, or 2027 grants due June 4th.
Okay.
The competitive grants, which so the Meta is $15,000 if you want to do, I think, bid documents, engineering drawings, it goes up to 25,000. The competitive grants are due, the next one's due next month. So that one's
Mhm.
that one might be a little bit too fast.
Yeah.
And I think the other ones, I don't remember when the other ones do. I think it's October. So it's usually every 6 months that we're
Yep.
looking at for the competitive grant. Um, Communities can only apply once per year too, though. So
Hmm.
and then you have to complete your grant before you can come back in and apply for another one. So you can't have multiple grants out there at one time.
Hmm. So we couldn't have, say, a meta grant and a competitive grant.
You can't have multiple competitive grants. I'm sorry, I
Oh,
should
okay.
have that. You can't have a meta grant and then a competitive grant out at the same time. But you can't apply for a meta grant at the school and then a meta grant, 6 months later at the town offices. You'd have to close one out and then
Hmm.
wait 1 year and then apply for the next one.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the competitive grants, right now they're up to $250,000 is the amount that you can apply for.
And I had read, if it's incorrect, like please tell me about some type
Mhm.
like of requirements around weatherization
Mhm.
before projects can start. So is that before grant funds are received, or is that just like general work that I mean that we should probably do anyway?
Sure.
And yeah.
Well, all of all of that. I mean, and some of it. So let's use the town offices, for example.
Yeah.
If you were going to ask us for a new HVAC system on the town
Hmm.
offices, you would have to show that the building is fully weatherized. So an engineer or project expediter, whomever, would have to go in and say there's no other opportunities for building envelope improvements or weatherization within this building. And that's important for a number of reasons. One is that that's really the first thing that anyone should do in their building is weatherization. It's usually the least expensive, has a good payback, has a long-term payback because the weatherization is likely going to outlast the HVAC system as well. So it's
Hmm.
gonna be there for a while, and it's going to be saving energy that whole time. Um, so we want the vendor, whomever's putting in the HVAC system, to take that into account. Like if you made major weatherization improvements, you might not need as big of an HVAC system to go in there. So
Hmm.
we want to make sure that calculation is taken into account when the HVAC system is sized. Um, you can ask for green communities funding for it. So say they identify, I don't know, $10,000 worth of weatherization, and then $150,000 HVAC project. You can do both of those simultaneously, just as long as they've taken the weatherization into account when they've sized the HVAC system.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um, so you can apply for both of those projects at the same time through green communities,
Okay.
but you
So,
can't put off the weatherization. That has to
Yes.
be done either in court, either at the same time or prior.
Yeah, and I guess that was going to be my question of like, I mean, I with the limit knowing that it's $250,000 of
Mhm.
like, could you apply for like weatherization, the HVAC, lighting, like how do you sort of like tie it all together? But it sounds
Mhm.
like that could be a possibility of
Yeah, and
like,
we've had communities knowing that they're going to need a new HVAC system in a few years. They'll come in for weatherization um, and lighting at a building. Um, and then the next round when they're eligible, once they've finished that out next year, they'll apply for the HVAC system.
Mhm.
okay, okay.
so
And oh, go ahead.
I
I'm going to
keep
talk.
thinking of I'm not getting the feel for a game plan here, the order of priorities. And, um, we're talking about weatherization, solar, new boiler, HVAC. Well, they're all great things. And presumably they'll all save money. I don't know. Maybe the HVAC system isn't that bad and it won't save that much money. But maybe the solar system on the school will be a big winner and we won't have to worry about the roof for another 20 years. Although when I did the roof tour, when I did the tour of the building, the people conducting the tour, I forget their names, were thinking that the roof wasn't going to be around for much more than 5 years. So do we wait then to put wait 5 years or put the solar system in now? I mean, but it was very vague, and I haven't seen any numbers attached to any measures, either numbers in costs or numbers in how much it's going to reduce our dependence on non-electric power. And so, like an energy audit would have all that information on it. And we did one years ago, I think maybe, I don't remember how many years ago, 15 years ago. And it talked about HVAC, but it didn't talk about the boiler. It didn't talk about solar. And so we're going to be applying for money, presumably. And I'm just not sure what the, what the, what the chronology of the process is. I would think first we do an energy analysis of these projects that we're thinking of, pulling them out of a hat mainly. Um, maybe you could clarify, and I'm not familiar with all the names of the problem, meta this and meta that, and all the names of various programs. Um, but I'd like to know more about it and feel like we're spending state money well, and we're providing the town with more reliable, renewable energy. So
Yeah,
just some
yeah, absolutely.
concerns.
Yeah, and that's why I'm here to help.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so Meta is our municipal energy technical assistance grant. So when we're talking
Okay.
about a technical assistance grant, that's the TA of Meta.
Okay.
Uh, so a couple other things I want to address is you mentioned the solar for the roof. We have some restrictions on the solar that we fund right now through our competitive grant. Um, so you may or may not be able to use solar for the school with this competitive grant anyway. So that might be thinking a little bit further off. In terms of the order of projects, we like to think of them like look at building weatherization first, look at an HVAC system, try and electrify, get off of fossil fuels, and then solar is kind of the last piece of the puzzle that you're putting in. But the weatherization, small energy improvements like lighting, maybe some other whatever is identified in an audit that can possibly save energy as well. HVAC, electrification, and then solar. In terms of our grants, a lot of communities will just go directly to the project expediters to do some of those, like directly through the utility and the expediters. They'll get proposals and then they'll bring those to us for funding. We review them. You mentioned spending state money wisely, and we do review them. They're competitive grants, and we choose the projects based on the amount of money that we're spending versus what we're getting out of it too. The program's getting
Great.
out of it.
Good.
So dollars per emissions being saved, dollars per MMBTU, which is a
Right.
measure of energy being saved. That's how we rank projects as well.
That's good. Was there any mention of standalone solar? Talking about the grade school, that would alleviate the need to worry about the roof.
Is that a question for me or?
That's a question for you or Nat or Caroline. And
Not at this point.
okay,
I have not heard of any conversations about prioritizing that at this point.
okay.
So for us, we've just started to add solar into our competitive grants because we've seen a lot of communities electrify their buildings, and now they're saying we're ready for solar, right? Our buildings weatherized, electrified. We've done so many other projects within the community. So it's only available to communities that are specially eligible or a climate leader community that can apply for
Mhm.
solar. Um, and it's only on buildings that are electrified as well.
Mm.
So, and that's the idea of tying it all together, saying, now that we're only using electricity, let's offset that electricity with on-site solar.
Mhm.
So that's great, but it strikes me as ironic that we'll be then we'll be replacing electric energy with electric energy from PVs. We'll be reducing our electric load by our energy conservation measures,
Hmm.
including putting and then I don't know, doesn't, it's, uh, if we replace the boilers that use natural gas, that's a
Hmm.
big decarbonization measure. Of course, that's a determination, I guess, the contractors or whomever would have to make how much life is left in this boiler. And does it make sense to replace it 10 years before its expected life is up? Or replace it now and replace the energy it creates with solar or something like that? You
Yeah,
see what I'm
well,
saying?
yeah, well, and I think for that instance, like we aren't a climate leader community anyway, and so it
Oh,
kind of sounds
okay.
like we wouldn't be eligible for that
Oh, well,
project.
that's good to know. Okay, great.
Yeah.
But that
And
that is so what you've described is the goal. We want to
yeah.
we don't want you taking out unless it makes financial and energy sense. We don't if you just put in a brand new perfectly efficient natural gas boiler in a building, that doesn't make sense to do that. We want you to look at prioritizing projects where if you have a 30-year-old oil boiler in one building, well, let's focus on that one first. And that could be your biggest user. So it's a matter of looking at what are your biggest users? Um, how old are they? And trying to make that prioritization plan of this building is really next. This building
Yeah, yeah,
meets it's old
Yeah.
equipment. It's wasteful equipment. It's ready to go. So let's electrify that one right now. Because if you then put in a brand new boiler tomorrow, it's going to be another 30 years before you can electrify that
Right.
that that
yeah,
boiler, and then
Yeah.
get off of fossil fuels completely. So
absolutely.
so making that prioritization plan is important too.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Right. So, Paul, what I mean, I know we often gravitate toward the school, having both served on the school committee before and seen short-term decisions that came back to bite the town. But I think what we're hearing from Carolyn is that there's a immediately identifiable weatherization needs in the town offices. For example, replacing the single pane windows that don't seal properly and would be part of the weatherization, and that we could ask for money for that as part of the weatherization. And that would be preparing us for upgrade of the HVAC. And we could ask now for through a meta grant, like what would it take to replace our existing system with something, electric, and how much time have we got? So we have a plan. And then for the school to maybe first go and have a conversation with the energy committee with the superintendent, and then the school committee saying, we know you have expected, but not necessarily precisely timed replacement needs in the future, right? That we know
Mhm.
that a boiler has a finite lifetime and a roof has a finite lifetime. And what we're asking is, can we work with you to find out now in advance what those lifetimes are and what options might be available to you at the time that you decide you can afford and need to replace, right? Just so that they have something in hand at that time. I wonder what you think of that, and Carolyn, what you think of that, and Mark, if we're hearing you properly about the right way to proceed on
Well,
things.
let me just say first that I did take a building tour with,
Mhm.
I forget who the superintendent was there, and I think the plant, the
Mhm.
the guy who does the energy stuff there
Right.
was there. So I think we can get a fairly accurate projection of what's going to last how long from from the school, which I
That
would.
yes, but if we request it, there was a missed opportunity, for example, in the regional school, where the boiler failed and they waited until the boiler failed to consider options. And so it had become an immediate replacement.
Right.
And the Deerfield Energy Committee, since it was their purview, asked to work with the school, but the school didn't feel like they had any time at that point to even consider options. So there's a new 30-year boiler that
Right.
could have been replaced with a non-carbon, with a electric
Yeah.
source. The school has so much on their plate that they're unlikely to be in a preparatory planning mode unless we can help them with that in some way.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think we should help them with
Right.
that. And I think they would be amenable to that.
Right. If we are coming to them before a crisis and saying, the next time you are looking at what it's going to take to replace a roof in a few years, if that's what it is,
Yeah.
are you asking about making sure that the roof is solar compatible?
Right.
Right?
Mhm.
Are
Yep.
you when you're looking at the HV, are you asking about ways not just of replacing what we had but options that would allow us to shift towards electrification and providing that with
Right.
solar?
Yeah, I agree totally. And I think we could start that soon, very soon, and draw up what our questions are and who do we meet with and when can we meet with them and talk with them and start the ball rolling.
Right.
As I agree, the Deerfield, the replacement of the boiler with another boiler was a shame, a missed opportunity.
So,
I
uh, sorry, Karen.
no, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Nat, you mentioned that you gravitate towards the schools, and you and Paul gravitate towards the schools a lot, and I like to hear that because we like when communities do that too. Schools are a significant portion of a community's energy and emissions use. So just looked up Whately's. It's
Mhm.
between 40 and 45%. Just that one building is between 40 and 45% of your emissions and energy use
Right.
For the town.
for the
Yeah.
town's
Yeah.
municipal operations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to prioritize that is good in a way.
Mhm.
But you also mentioned it could be a little while before you have those plans in place of how properly to do that. So if this was like right around the corner and saying, we need to do this right now, then it might make sense to focus on that as the opportunity. But if that is a few years away, you don't want to miss the opportunities that are at hand, like
Yeah.
potentially the town offices or some of the
Right.
other
Okay.
buildings. We haven't even mentioned vehicles. Vehicles are another place that you have
Mhm.
energy use and emissions. So just setting it up in line of like talking it through and trying to find out what is the priority for the town and a realistic a realistic timeline for them.
Right. As far as electric vehicles go, the single largest impediment is not having a Massachusetts approved uh, police acceptable electric cruiser. Right, like there's customization of various Ford vehicles for police cruisers and the like. And the police are sitting around idling and they're running their car all the time. They're running the
Mhm.
radios and the computers and the like. And the police get that it would be really useful not just to be idling and burning fuels going nowhere. Um, but they don't know how to identify a um, a vehicle that would suit their needs and that would satisfy the mass procurement rules for purchase of public vehicles. So is there any help ongoing in that regard?
Um, so I don't know if Massachusetts necessarily approves vehicles. If you're talking about the procurement contracts, like the state contracts that you're hoping to purchase
Right,
off of.
right.
I believe, as far as I know, the Chevy Blazer is on
Mhm.
there, and there are a few towns that have purchased the Blazer EV.
I see. Some
Um,
customized. Yeah.
it's not. I mean, there was the Blazer EV was made specifically as a police vehicle.
Hmm.
Um, it's I don't know the trim model on it, but it was made and as a to be outfitted as a police vehicle. There are a few towns that have adopted it and are running it. Um,
Hmm. Do
the
do you have names of those towns or contacts that our committee might reach out to?
Yeah, and I know that Chevy was actually I think working with some towns to get it in front of towns, but I think that program's kind of
Mm.
filled up over
Yeah,
the
they're
last
kind of
year.
backtracking. Yeah.
Um,
We brought up the Chevy Blazer to the police before, and they weren't that impressed or ready to jump on it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it usually takes some time for them to be
oh
interested
yeah,
in adopting
that
it.
that's right. And they want to see a vendor who's saying, here it is, already customized for police work.
Yep.
They don't want to then have to figure out how to adapt it, right? So that's the difficulty we encounter and the most easily one, Um, but so yes, having some contact and finding out what the municipalities did and finding if GM still has any commitment to electric vehicles would be really
GM
helpful.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Wellesley bought a 2024 Chevy Blazer EV PPV, a police vehicle model.
Okay.
So it is, it's made as as a police vehicle. It's not
Okay.
just one that they're kind of outfitting and trying to turn into one.
And who would the contact then be, the police department or the town administrator or
Um,
what do you
I think
think?
I can get you a contact for that. Let me follow up with
Okay.
Caroline after.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and I think they have a fleet manager that works.
Mhm.
In terms of the rest of our vehicles, I know our highway superintendent does have a hybrid truck, like the big,
Mhm.
like souped up hybrid truck for the highway. They do have an additional truck that they will be requesting to replace soon in this next, with this next budget.
Mhm.
It currently does not pass inspection and certainly needs to be replaced and whatnot.
Mhm.
But I think they have some concerns about like,
mm,
you know, change. I think is the
Yeah,
easiest way to say that.
yeah.
But
A lot of
um,
municipal workers will you know, be persuaded a little bit more if their peers are doing it too. So
mhm,
if we can't find that it's worked well for other workers in similar communities, um,
mhm,
if I can find information on that, I'll try and dig some up if some other communities have adopted either electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles.
Sure.
Um, so I'll try and dig something up on that.
Right.
yeah,
Because somewhere we have a town policy that they should consider first electric
mhm,
alternatives, but I don't think the town departments do a lot of research to see if there are any, you know. Um, and it's we're all very small, short staffed,
yeah,
and it's
Mhm.
it's not like there's a lot of idle time to educate yourself on that either, I imagine, as in the police department.
If you are interested in either light or medium or heavy duty battery electric vehicles, our grants will cover a portion of that too. So
Oh,
okay,
thank you.
it's
Which
yeah,
and
grant
these
is
are
that
prescriptive. This is the competitive grant.
okay.
So these are prescriptive type grants, so they're not going to cover the entire amount,
mhm,
but it would be like $7,500 towards a light duty vehicle, or for medium and heavy duty, I think it goes up to 15,000 towards the purchase of those. If you were leasing, it'd be less. It'd be 5,000 towards a lease for light duty and 10,000 for medium and heavy.
Okay.
good. That's good
So
to know.
there's something to start with.
Charging stations too. You'd have to think about charging stations,
Right.
and we have prescriptive grants for that as well. You
Okay.
also mentioned windows earlier. That would fall under our
Mm,
prescriptive grants. So we wouldn't cover the entire amount. There would have to be the town would have to cover part of that. I think we only go up to $75 per square foot of total window area. So
mhm.
Okay.
it's a small amount towards it, but it's not nothing.
I
Right.
wonder, this is a little beyond the scope of our abilities, but um, we have school buses that serve the regional district,
Mhm,
and they're not very heavily used, to say the least. There are very few students in them, and they accommodate 47 students, I believe, and they serve about seven maybe, and they're gas fired. And I'm wondering if any towns have had a similar problem, and have they switched to an electric bus or adopted vans, smaller, just not using a big bus for a
mhm.
few children, or have they decided to make the students who drive their own cars to the high school pay for a parking space, so there's more incentive for them to take the bus if we're going to have the buses. They're a big chunk of change for us small towns, and it'd be nice to do something about that. I know if you've ever come across anything along those lines.
I don't
Of,
know anything about the latter of charging folks for parking that, but
yeah, sure.
I know that there have been schools that are purchasing electric buses. A lot of school districts are purchasing electric buses. A lot of that was done through the grants through the past administration, federal administration. There was some grant funding towards electric school buses, and those have been rolled out over the past couple of years. For smaller vans, electric vans, the town of Warwick did purchase an electric van. I'll send you, um, I don't know if there's a chat. I'll follow up with, I gotta make notes here or else I'm gonna forget. I'll send you a article in the recorder about Warwick's electric van that they purchased. And that was precisely for that to have, because they needed a smaller van that could be used for that application.
Mm.
Great.
Yeah,
And
well,
this was a van that they kind of outfitted to be a school bus.
sure. Now, Paul, you're mentioning school, but um, our town doesn't own any buses, right?
No,
They contract
Leonard
out to a private service.
Yep.
Crypto.
But um, the 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 three town or four town senior center has buses, and I wonder if any of those are can allow for wheelchair accommodations, for example.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm sure they can be outfitted
Mhm.
for that. That is, yeah, that's not something that I'm aware of, but I'm sure they can be
Okay.
outfitted towards it.
All right.
So I just want to know that take note that it's 2:20 already.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that if there's any other questions, it sounds like we as a committee have some prioritizing to do, but
Mhm.
I just wanted to clarify something that you said, Mark, which is that sort of the project expediter program and working with utility kind of allows us to like potentially could allow us to skip over the meta grant and go towards the
Mhm.
competitive one, which may save us time and resources in the meantime. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, for more straightforward projects, the ones
Yeah.
that aren't as complex, ones that you feel comfortable and this is the town's choice, that you would feel
Mhm.
comfortable with the project expediter coming in and saying, this is really straightforward. You just need to do this, this, and this. Here's our proposal. You could then take that and turn that around towards an application for a competitive grant. You might not need a technical assistance. If it was a really complicated project, then you might want to lean towards the technical assistance, but some of that's up to the town to decide.
Could you send me the like if there's any contact information for the project expediter
Expedite.
program? Or
Yeah,
is
I may have sent it to you in the last one. I don't remember. You're EverSource, right? Or you're National Grid.
yeah, we're
Everson.
Eversource.
Okay. Yeah, Nick Pettipos is the contact there, but I can he's great. I'll dig up his contact information and send it over to you.
Thank
All
you.
right. I have to go quite soon. I don't have any
Okay.
further comments. I really appreciate you making yourself available, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, really anytime. And hopefully we'll be getting a new Western Regional Coordinator soon.
Mhm.
But please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk about this.
Will do. And thanks
Thank you, Mark.
also
Mhm.
to all three of you.
And thank you
Um,
too,
Uh,
Paul.
okay. That Nick Pettipos, is that his name?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He works at EverSource. He would be the contact to assign a contractor to you to get out there and look at the building.
yes, I've heard really good things about him.
Yep.
Okay, great. We have
okay.
our assignment.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. Nat, are you able to stay like until 2:30 or should we
Yes,
let
but
you
that's
go?
a hard deadline. Sorry.
Okay. Yep,
All
that's
right. Well,
totally
then
fine.
I'll drop off. Okay. I'll send you a couple emails.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark. I
Thanks,
really
Mark.
appreciate it.
Of course. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so the last two things I wanted to do, and maybe we'll do the first one first, which is set our next meeting date. Um, would it sounds like 1:30 on Mondays typically work for us? I checked your schedule, Nat, and it seems like
Yeah.
that works. Should we meet in 2 weeks on the 13th?
That's possible.
Possible
Okay,
here too.
okay.
Okay. Um, sure, if you think that's enough time to turn around whatever we're going to look into next, then that's sure.
Yeah, well, so I think yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to me to discuss what we would like to prioritize at the next meeting. I feel like we talked about a lot of different possibilities and probably things that the town would benefit from all of them. Um, I'm in the camp of I think we should prioritize the town offices as it sounds like
Mhm.
the school may take a little bit longer to plan and they're in the middle of budget season right now. It's really busy for the school committees right now. So
Right.
it could be um I could see us connecting with the project expediter program have
Mhm.
them develop a plan for the town offices, and then we use that plan to apply for money for October.
Yeah, I would concur. We might just set up a preliminary uh meeting with Darius Modesto, the superintendent, in May, for example,
Yeah.
just to say, here are things we'd like to get a sense of what your sense of the replacement schedule is, and whether there's
Mhm.
something we could do to help with the financing if we were to apply for grants early enough, right? And
Mhm.
if we asked the contractors to provide multiple options that would be compatible with those grants, right?
Yep.
They still decide, and they're very insistent on that, and I understand. Um, but that would at least get in the door without coming and demanding something, and still getting the school to think about it long range if they haven't been already.
Hmm. Yeah, certainly, because they may say, we don't actually have like too many on the horizon that, yeah, exactly like you were
Right,
saying, that
right,
would even qualify for this, for a
right.
grant community specifically, but maybe something else.
Because otherwise they're going to be tempted, understandably, just go whatever the least cost option is, without taking into account what reimbursements might be available, right? Or what the operating costs are, the following
Hmm.
year. And so we could still do something that would actually be financially better if we're able to fold in those other factors and by starting ahead of time.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. And I know at least for the HVAC in the town, like
Right,
like in the past year, I think a service person has been called at least 5 times to
right,
service
right,
it. And at this point, Pete has sort of figured out the cheat code with it or whatever, but
right.
it'd be nice
So
to have something a
if
little bit more
I agree.
sustainable.
So if our agenda next meeting could be on what are our next steps for the town,
Yeah,
um, I'm sure that would use up the meeting time, right?
Oh, yes.
You
certainly. And
okay
I
with
did,
that, Paul?
I agree.
Okay.
okay,
Yeah.
sounds good to me. All right. So
So what are we talking here? May,
we're looking at April 13th
April
at one
13th.
thirty.
Okay, if we can have the info by then, I'm fine with that.
The 20th and the 27th are also okay for me.
Okay.
May 4th is not, May 11th is not.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
thinking the 20th would give us a little more, well, that's a Monday, but that's okay, right?
yes.
And that gives us a little more time. If this isn't going to encroach on deadlines for grants, I don't know how much
So,
time we need.
You said the meta grants, which are not competitive and very attractive, June 5th is a deadline. I would not be comfortable waiting till May to meet to discussing that. Um,
Right. Well, I'm
and
okay
then
with the 13th if you're okay with it, you too.
what
well,
type
I
of information are you wanting
well,
for
like for
this?
example, he mentioned that there's money we might be able to get from Meta for the plans that would be needed to have to implement weatherization, right? Or to
Hmm.
implement the HVAC. And we could find out information from both and ask for 15 or to $20,000 worth of help in that regard. But we also need to know like how to if a weatherization study is needed, from whom, and how do we schedule it? Um, and how do we get somebody who can then say, yes, here's what the cost of the window replacements are going to be, or things that we already know need to be done. Um, and so that we don't miss that chance, particularly if he's saying it's non-competitive, he's essentially saying you can have the money if you ask for it. If we're So can we be clear about what we would want to ask?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay.
Sounds good.
So Monday the 13th or the 20th?
Uh, I have no ability to work on this is my problem. We just sort of sit here and kibitz. How is your schedule? Um,
I have enough capacity to pursue this.
okay. So let's do the
I
13th.
okay,
Absolutely.
okay,
Okay.
13th. Okay.
Good, good.
So
We're in
we've come to
agreement.
the end of our meeting. It's all right if we don't approve the minutes, but thank you both for your time today, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Well, I would move to approve the minutes
Oh, okay.
of the
I'd
past
second.
meeting.
Okay.
Okay. All in favor? All
Aye.
Here,
right.
here.
Okay.
Perfect.
And
All
we
right.
move to adjourn. Very good.
All right.
That's
Amazing. Thank you
spoken like
all.
a town moderator there.
Yeah, but aren't you the chair?
Uh, the chair of the Energy Committee. Sorry,
Yes.
I neglected my duty. I'll make it up for next meeting.
All right, Paul.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Maybe do some pruning on that greenery in the back there. Okay. It's taking over.
It's taking over. I know. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you both. See you
Okay.
Okay.
soon.
Goodbye.
Bye.